All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining our briefing on the City of Philadelphia's response to gun violence. This briefing is for press only. If you are not a member of the press, please log out and watch today's live stream on the City of Philadelphia's Facebook page, or tune in to 900 AM or 96.1 FM WURD. We will begin our briefing with remarks by Mayor Jim Kenney. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thanks, Kevin, and good afternoon to everyone. Before we get into today's update, I want to acknowledge the officer-involved shooting that happened yesterday. In responding to a 911 call at the 5700 block of Overbrook Avenue, we can confirm that an officer was shot and injured and that another man was killed. Two officers that responded were crisis intervention trained, and I had the opportunity to visit the injured officer yesterday to wish him a quick recovery, and he looked good. The incident is under investigation, and we'll share updates as they become available. I also want to acknowledge that this week is a very difficult time for the family of Walter Wallace Jr. and for the entire city of Philadelphia. His death 1 year ago yesterday underscored the urgency of the changes needed within our city when responding to help people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. Our administration remains committed to making lasting reforms that will ensure that all Philadelphians have the safety and available supports that they deserve. These include increasing our mental health training, standing up more crisis response services, and increasing our partnerships between behavioral health and police. To that end, in the last year, we've worked across institutions, departments, community leaders, and organizations to enact meaningful reforms, reimagine public safety, and advance racial justice. One of the changes we've initiated, which has been in the works for several years, is the co-responder model for responding to 911 calls. This is part of a larger effort to broaden the range of first responders in Philadelphia and ensure the appropriate response is sent to meet the needs of the person in crisis. The co-responder program, still in pilot mode, involves pairing a behavioral health care provider with a police officer. And earlier today, I was honored to see firsthand how it works. These teams are specially trained and available to respond to situations involving someone with mental health needs. This morning, I had a chance to spend some time with one of these teams and see their important work in action. The trust and partnership between the team members was amazing, and they are helping Philadelphians in a whole new way. The co-responder teams build on long-standing work of training officers in crisis intervention. Currently, there are more than 3,500 CIT-trained police officers. More than 50% of Philadelphia Police Department officers are CIT-trained and are assigned throughout the city on all tours of duty. While these and other reforms are a significant step forward, the city remains committed to making our city the fairest, the most equitable that it can be. Now I'd like to turn it over to Erica Atwood, Senior Director of the Office of Policy and Strategic Initiatives for Criminal Justice and Public Safety, for the latest updates on the city's Anti-Violence Community Expansion Grant Program, including 4 new awards we recently made to community organizations. With these awards, we've now committed more than $4.8 million in funding to groups doing anti-violence work on the ground. Erica, please.
Thank you, Mayor Kenney, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about those 4 organizations. And so first we have North Square Community Alliance. North Square Community Alliance presently has 3 youth empowerment centers located in Upper Kensington, Fair Hill, and Hunting Park. They serve young people who are youth and young adults who are at risk between the ages of 13 and 24. Through the CEG grant, the youth empowerment centers will expand existing youth development programs and focus on key violence prevention and provide trauma-informed services, including psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Secondly, we have Somerset Community Center and Lighthouse Sports Complex. The funding towards the Somerset Community Center will enhance its physical space as a safe haven for families and young people, provide ongoing and consistent structure for youth and young adults, and provide accessible organized sports to community families and youth. Next, we have Power Corps PHL. Through our grant, they will be able to launch the Trust Program. This will be an urban farm-based healing initiative exclusively for returning citizens and young people vulnerable to gun violence that offers immediate enrollment and income while engaging in work readiness skills building and therapeutic supports. And lastly, for this week, we have Youth Build Philadelphia. Youth Build is a charter school. It is unique in alternative programming and offers an opportunity for young adults between the ages of 18 to 21 to earn their high school diplomas, as well as gain vital life skills and transition to post-secondary employment, training, and education. What this grant will allow them to do is expand their programming to ensure young adults who are at the highest risk are engaged and supported with positive mental health supports, prepare them for meeting employment, and includes an expansion of case management, counseling, service learning, and leadership development and after-school activities, as well as paid vocational jobs for participants in Youth Build. Those are our updates for today. Again, this is we'll be continuing to provide grant updates on a rolling basis with the hopes that we will be able to have a full announcement in the next 3 weeks. So please keep your eyes and ears out for more information about the updated list of grantees for the community expansion grants. And with that, I'll hand it over to Commissioner Outlaw.
Thank you, Erica, and good afternoon, everyone. Last week, I was discussing the brave actions of some of our officers during the last few weeks. First, with the workplace shooting that occurred at Logan Plaza in the 35th District, and a second incident involving 4 16th District officers who encountered a suspect armed with a rifle and several handguns. Yesterday, officers from the 19th District encountered a male armed with a hammer and a pickaxe. Officers on the scene ordered the male to drop the weapons, and when the male did not comply with their orders, one of the officers on the scene tasered the male. After being struck by the taser, the male was able to get right back up and then lunged at the officers. A struggle ensued, which resulted in the male officer being struck in the head with one of the weapons. At this point, with the attacker on top of the officer, both officers discharged their weapons, striking the male. Unfortunately, one of the officers was also struck by gunfire during the struggle. It's unclear at this time whether the officer suffered the gunshot wound after discharging his firearm or whether the gunshot wound occurred as a result of his partner firing her weapon. The investigation is still in its very early stages, and we will release more details as they become available. As a law enforcement officer, one of the most difficult decisions any of us may be faced with is the possibility of having to take a life. This shooting has touched many, the trauma, which may be lifelong for some. Over the last several years, there has been a steady decline in morale among law enforcement agencies throughout the country. Currently, employers across the nation are struggling with employee retention, and that is especially true in our field of law enforcement. Many veteran police officers will tell you that the past several years have been the most challenging of their careers. Police work has always been a difficult job, but in today's climate, our roles and expectations of police officers have continued to evolve. With this in mind, the PPD has been working to provide our employees with resources that will help those who are experiencing distress during these unprecedented times. Our employees have access to a vast array of services through our Employee Assistance Program, or EAP, as well as through the Law Enforcement Health Benefits Board, or LEHB, who work with Penn Behavioral Health. We extend our condolences to those affected and wish our officers a speedy recovery in yesterday's incident and all of the other incidents that we're all too familiar with. On a different note, I want to discuss some very disturbing incidents that the Philadelphia Police Department has responded to over the last several weeks involving children. Last week, we were discussing school safety measures after a deadly shooting outside of Lincoln High School where a passerby was killed and a student was critically wounded. Unfortunately, a few days later, there was another incident involving another Philadelphia high school student, this one occurring inside of a school in West Philadelphia and involving an 18-year-old student of the school. While the school district is responsible for safety measures taken within the schools, outside of the schools, our officers are working with the School District of Philadelphia and the School Safety Board to ensure that our children have safe passage to and from school. This means that the PPD has increased patrols around schools and in areas where more officers are needed. Also, we greatly appreciate the community's continued assistance and helping to keep an eye out on what's going on in the streets. Speaking of community investment in the safety of others, Halloween is taking place this weekend. This is an obviously exciting time for our young people, our children, and for some adults. I want to stress the importance of chaperoning young children around the neighborhood. It's getting dark out earlier, and children in their excitement may forget to look for cars. Please make sure your children are walking around with a trusted adult or older sibling. Use reflective clothing or flashlights, and please inspect your children's candy to ensure that their candy is safe to consume. Ahead of the holiday festivities in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Police Department will be hosting several Halloween activities throughout the weekend. This is a great opportunity to get trick-or-treating done early and also an excellent opportunity to connect with our officers. Please check our Twitter and Facebook pages for more information about those events. Switching gears, I want to briefly discuss 2 missing children in the last week and why Amber Alerts were not issued in these cases. Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, who's our Deputy Commissioner over investigations, will go into more detail surrounding these cases later on during his presentation. The first case involves a 13-year-old female by the name of Leanna Cuevas, who went missing on Saturday, October 23rd of this year from the 1600 block of Hofnagel Street. Thankfully, she's been located and was treated at an area hospital. The second case involves a 10-year-old female by the name of Quidir Williams, from the 300 block of Glen Echo Road, who was last seen on Thursday, October 21st, 2021. PPD received several inquiries into why Amber Alerts were not issued in these 2 cases. First and foremost, in Pennsylvania, Amber Alerts are issued by the Pennsylvania State Police. The Department of Justice has specific guidelines on when Amber Alerts should be issued. These include the following. 1, that there's reasonable belief that by law enforcement that an abduction has occurred, that the law enforcement agency believes that the child is in imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death, that there is enough descriptive information about the victim and the abduction for law enforcement to issue an Amber Alert to assist in the recovery of the child, that the abduction is of a child aged 17 years or younger, and that the child's name and other critical data elements, including the child abduction flag, have been entered into the National Crime Information Center, or NCIC, system. For more information about Amber Alerts, please visit amberalertojp.gov for additional information. These 2 recent cases did not meet the DOJ's criteria for issuing Amber Alerts. However, I want you to keep in mind that an Amber Alert is just one tool available to law enforcement personnel. We have detectives and officers actively investigating all of our missing persons cases, and we are hopeful that Quidir and many like her will be located safely soon. Lastly, before I turn this over to Deputy Commissioner Dales, I want to briefly mention that this weekend was our first Youth Advisory Commission meeting. I had the wonderful opportunity of meeting with a group of young people this weekend to discuss public safety and what they think the police can do to improve their interactions with the public. I'm looking forward to regularly meeting with our new members of our commission. And if anyone out there is interested in joining the Youth Advisory Commission, please visit our website at phillypolice.com and go to the Program and Services tab. Scroll down to the Youth Advisory Commission interest form and fill it out. The program, again, is open to youth ages 14 to 18 who are interested in creating positive change in their communities. With that, I will now turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Joel Dales, Deputy Commissioner of Patrol Operations, who will provide you with updated statistics on what police are seeing at our pinpoint grids and citywide. Deputy Commissioner Dales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you pull up the slides, please? Okay. All right, I will start with the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats. Looking at the top of the chart, year to date as of October 24th of this year, Philadelphia had 450 homicides and 1,910 shooting victims. In comparison to last year, homicides are up 14%, 450 this year versus 395 last year, and shooting victims are up 8%, 1,910 this year versus 1,774 last year. Looking at the bottom left of the chart again, the motives still remain the same: arguments, drugs, and domestic. Next slide, please. This slide shows the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats weekly comparison. From October 18th to October 24th, we had 12 homicides, 42 shooting victims, and 37 shooting occurrences. I want to point out that 3 of the homicides for this week are delayed cases where the victim later succumbed to their injuries. The date of the assaults were March 23rd of 2008, July 4th of this year, and July 19th of this year. So this week, all 3 cases were ruled a homicide. So that's why that number is being carried within that number 12 in reference to homicides. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide homicides and homicides that occurred in the pinpoint grids. If you look at the top of the chart, it shows citywide homicides up 14%. And looking at the bottom chart, it shows homicides in the pinpoint grids up 3%. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide shooting victims and shooting victims in the pinpoint grids. Citywide shooting victims are up 8%, and the pinpoint grids are down 14%. Next slide, please. So taking a look at the shootings and homicides within a 6-week period year-to-date percentage, as you can see, we are still showing a steady decline in shooting victims as well as homicides. So if you look at the top citywide, we're now at 8% in comparison to last week, which was 9%. The homicide citywides were even in comparison to last week. And as you can see, starting from September all the way down to the present date, we are pretty much seeing a decline in the percentages. Looking at the bottom of the chart, you see the homicides in the pinpoint grid and shooting victims. We are even in comparison to last week at 3%, and we are down 14% in shooting victims in our pinpoint grids in comparison to last week's last week's shooting victims within our pinpoint grids, which was showing 13%. Next slide, please. Looking at the top of the chart, it shows citywide homicides down 6% and citywide shooting victims down 8%. When comparing the current 4-week period, which is September 27th to October 24th, with the previous 4-week period of August 30th to September 26th. Looking at the bottom of the chart, it shows homicides down 46% and shooting victims down 10% in the pinpoint grids when comparing the current 4-week period with the previous 4-week periods, which I mentioned the range of the date range we mentioned earlier a few minutes ago. Next slide, please. Right, this slide shows the year-end total VUFA arrests for 2017 through 2020 and the total VUFA arrests year-to-date for 2021 from January 1st to October 25th. In 2020, we reached an all-time high for VUFA arrests that totaled 2,324. And so far this year, we have made 2,149 VUFA arrests. And I would like to point out that this time last year, we had 1,727 VUFA arrests, which is a 24% increase when compared to the year-to-date total. Next slide, please. As of October 25th of this year, 4,946 crime guns were recovered in our city. A crime gun, again, is any gun recovered by police as part of a criminal investigation. And I also want to make note that this does not include guns from the buybacks or turn-ins. Last year, we recovered 4,015 crime guns by the end of October, which is showing at the in 2020 chart here on the chart in 2020, the third from the top, the green, that shows 586. So by the end of October, we reached 4,015. So comparing that number to this year's number year to date, which again is 4,946, we are currently showing a 23% increase, which is 931 more crime guns recovered this year compared to last year from January to the end of October, and we did not finish October this year yet. So if we continue at this rate, we will reach a total of 6,058 by the end of the year. Next slide, please. And lastly, year to date, 477 privately made firearms, also known as ghost guns, were recovered in Philadelphia. I would like to point out that in 2020, a total of 250 ghost guns were recovered by the end of the year. As of October 25th, we have surpassed that number, as you can see. This shows a significant increase in ghost guns recovered this year in comparison to both 2019 and 2020. And with that, I will now turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Investigations, and he will speak about cases we wish to highlight.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Joel Dales. Today, I'm going to talk and highlight several cases which we're asking for help from the public. Two cases are known fugitives that are currently wanted for homicides that we've been unable to locate their suspects. Then I'm going to give some updates on the recent arrests of homicide suspects within the past week. And finally, I'm going to give updates, as the commissioner mentioned, updates on the two, what we had is two missing juveniles, one of which has been located safely. So Kevin, if you would please put up the video for the first case, which is M2157. And as soon as that comes up, there will be on the screen, we're going to have pictures of two males. Looks like we're going through the screen to get there. Thank you. On the screen, you see Nadir Mitchell. He's currently wanted, and Muso Sadaib, who was previously arrested on July 14th. We're looking to locate Mr. Mitchell, who's 24 years old. He's wanted for a homicide by shooting of a 22-year-old male that occurred on May 31st in the area, May 31st of 2020. And let me point out, this is just after the beginning of the initial civil unrest from last year. And as you can see from the video, he was running away while being chased by males, and he was shot down. The victim's name is Daquan Collins. He was 22 years old. And Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Sadaib were identified as two males with a group of other individuals that were involved in looting several commercial businesses on that day on May 31st. While walking near the CVS located at 49th and Market Street, the victim, who was not involved in the looting or the unrest, he was chased and he was shot numerous times. Nadir Mitchell and Mr. Sadaib were identified as the perpetrators. Sadaib was arrested, as I indicated, on July 14th of 2020. However, Mr. Mitchell has remained in fugitive status since we've been able to obtain an arrest warrant. Anyone has any information about the suspect's whereabouts, we urge them to contact our Homicide Unit, 686-3334, or our tip line at 686-TIPS. Remember, there is a $20,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Mr. Mitchell. And if you can go on to the next video. Now, this is from a case that just occurred within the last 3 weeks. The male that we saw on the screen, Shafiq Lewis, is 29 years old. And this incident occurred on October the 8th. Now, we don't have video of the actual shooting, but there's going to be a male running past your screen, and that male has been identified as Mr. Lewis. This occurred on October 8th at 9:03 in the morning on the 3100 block of North Judson Street. Officers responded to a radio call for a person with a gun. We located a victim who had been shot in the chest while sitting inside of a vehicle with several other males. And as I said, the video, while it doesn't show the shooting, it captured the sound of the multiple gunshots and the male fleeing a foot. Through very diligent investigative work, the detectives were able to piece together enough video surveillance from the area to develop Shafiq Lewis as the suspect. And on October 20th, we obtained an arrest warrant for Mr. Lewis for murder, 5 counts of aggravated assault and 5 counts of simple assault, violation of Uniform Firearms Act, and related offenses. Again, you don't have to show it again. You can go on to the next thing. Okay. Again, we are asking for the public's help in locating Mr. Lewis, and there also is a $20,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of this homicide fugitive. The next series of photos are going to be of individuals that we've arrested since the last press conference. And since that time, we've arrested 6 individuals wanted for homicide. Some of these cases go back to 2020. The male on the screen that you see right now is Mr. Mark Martin, 27 years old. And on April 28th of 2020, our victims, Joseph Humphrey, 20 years old, and Khalil Stafford, 18 years old, were shot and killed on the 4700 block of North 3rd Street. Mr. Martin was also connected to a non-fatal shooting that occurred on October the 3rd of 2020 on the 5800 block of Cedarhurst Avenue. And on October 21st of 2021, this year, we obtained an arrest warrant for Mr. Martin, charging him with 2 counts of murder and related offenses for the double homicide from 4700 North 3rd Street, as well as for attempted murder and related offenses in the non-fatal shooting from 5800 Cedarhurst Avenue. Mr. Martin was in custody for an aggravated assault that occurred in May of 2021. I'm still on the previous one, Kev, I'm sorry. And when we obtained the arrest warrant, we were able to take him to a homicide, and he was charged with those offenses. Now you can go on to the next one, thank you. On the screen now is Major Pittman, and on December 27th of 2020, our victim was Naeem Kitchen, an 18-year-old male. He was shot multiple times on the 8500 block of Eastwick Place. And on October 15th, an arrest warrant was obtained for Qasim Jones, 17 years old. And on April 27th, Mr. Jones was arrested for murder. Through our investigation, a second suspect was developed, and on October 23rd, Major Pittman, who you see on the screen, he's 20 years old, he was arrested and charged with murder, conspiracy, and related offenses in the homicide of Naeem Kitchen. Now you can go to the next one, thank you. Male on your screen is Warren Green. On May 30th of this year, a 66-year-old male, John Shimkunis, was found suffering an injury to his head in the 7000 block of Roosevelt Boulevard. This happened inside of a Wawa. The medical examiner ruled that the victim's death was a homicide. And shortly after the ruling, information was developed who was responsible for the incident, and it was identified as Warren Green. He's 51 years old. And on October 22nd, we got the warrant, and on October 24th, Mr. Green was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter in that case. The next people you have up on the screen, Tyrone Mitchell is 19 years old, and he's been arrested, and Rashid Williams is still wanted. On September 18th, the victim, Salim Pointer, was 30 years old. He was found suffering from multiple gunshot wounds on the 2500 block of West Montgomery Avenue. And on October 24th, Mr. Mitchell was arrested and charged with murder. And that's why we have him up on the screen to the left. And his co-conspirator, Rashid Williams, who is on the right, is still wanted. And again, there's a reward out there for information leading to the arrest of Mr. Williams. The next slide is, you can move the slide, Kevin, is Rodney Davidson K. And on October 1st, victim Jeremy Pizichil, 35-year-old male, was found suffering a gunshot wound to the chest on the 1600 block of South Christopher Columbus Boulevard. A second shooting victim who survived was later located at the hospital. An arrest warrant was obtained on October 22nd, and later that day, Mr. Rodney Davidson K. surrendered to homicide detectives. He was charged with murder, possession of an instrument of crime, and REAP, recklessly endangering another person. And the next and last one of our arrested persons is a photo of Reggie Spencer. On October 19th, victim was Kyleek Williams, 17-year-old male. He was shot once in the abdomen inside of a residence on the 6000 block of American Street. The offender, identified as 17-year-old Reggie Spencer, was still on location when police arrived. The following day, on October the 20th, Mr. Williams has succumbed to his injuries. Reggie Spencer has been charged with murder, violation of the Uniform Firearms Act, and related offenses. And that's it for the updates on this past week's murder suspects who have been arrested. And now, as the commissioner indicated, I want to address a couple of missing person cases involving 2 young juvenile females. The first one you see up on the screen is still an open and active investigation. This is 10-year-old Quadir Williams. She was reported missing to Northwest detectives on October 21st by her foster mother. Detectives have been consistently following up on all leads and information in attempts to identify Quadir. At this time, we believe that Quadir left the area voluntarily, that she's not in danger, and we do believe that she may be in the company of a family member. We're still working very hard to locate her and ensure her well-being. And if anyone has any information about the whereabouts, they are urged to contact Northwest Detectives 686-3351, or they can also call 911 or our tip line 686-TIPS. And now you can go to the next, the next one I don't even think is up there. And the reason it's not up there is because, as the commissioner mentioned, Liana Cuevas, who was reported to Northeast Detectives on October the 23rd by her mother, she has been located. And our Northeast Detectives work very hard with our Special Victims Unit, as well as our partners from the FBI, the Child Exploitation Task Force. And we did, and we're able to locate Liana as quickly as possible. She was located in good health yesterday on the 4900 block of D Street. She was in the home of a friend. We had information that she had left the house of her own accord on Saturday, and there are no charges pending in this, and she has been reunited with her family. So that's an update on the 2 missing young juvenile girls. And right now I'll turn it back to Kevin at the mayor's office.
Thank you. Now that our presenters have finished, we're going to move to Q&A for members of the press. Because of limited time, only one representative from each media outlet is permitted to ask questions. And reporters are asked to limit their questions to 2 or fewer for this first round. If we have a second round, we will add additional questions after that. We do have a hard stop today at 2 p.m. So with that, I'm going to move over to Claudia Vargas of NBC 10.
Great. Hello. Commissioner, you spoke earlier about low morale. And as you know, we had sent out a survey to the police department in which 320 members replied. Of those, 93% say morale is low or very low. How do you manage a department when you have such responses as 93%, which is essentially 300 members saying that there's low morale?
So thank you. 300 of thousands is a pretty low number. I will say it's 5%. But with that said, it's no secret that morale is low all over the country. It's not just our department. It's in departments all over the country, regardless of the size of the agency. There's been a lot that's been going on in the policing profession. And then outside of the policing profession that has impacted how we do our jobs. So I would say that that's a no-brainer in the sense that we know that morale is low, which is why I said that. We've been through a lot in these last couple of years, a lot. Typically, incidents that would be deemed something that happens once in a professional lifetime has happened simultaneously within a compressed part of all of our professional lives. And I can't say that anyone, unless they lived during the Spanish flu, can say that they've experienced this before. With that said, I appreciate that you all put out a survey, but I can't speak to the results of the survey with confidence, knowing that the survey itself wasn't done in a scientific way. However, we know that morale is an issue. Like I said, we've pushed out several resources whether it's healing forums or, again, reminding people of EAP or LEHB resources available to them, because we don't expect our staff to be robots. We want them to have venues in which they can express what they're experiencing. We value their well-being, and we want to make sure that any feedback that they provide is not only addressed, but it's heard.
And just, and I know I've mentioned this to you guys before, but we never said it was scientific. But 300 police members, still significant to hear from. One of the other things that they mentioned was 82% said not at all or not so confident in the current police department leadership. So how do you lead a department in which at least a few hundred of your officers don't have confidence in leadership?
Have you filled out a survey lately?
I have, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Were you pleased with the service?
With the survey or the service?
With the service. I say that because typically people fill out surveys typically when they're not pleased with the service that's provided. 5%, again, statistically, is not a significant number. We know that there are going to be some people that aren't happy with anything, with leadership, just the current world of policing or whatever it is. So in answer to your question, how do you continue to lead? You do just that. You lead, right? And you not only focus on the remaining 95% that may also have some positive or even constructive feedback to provide, but you recognize that there's a lot of folks that are out here that have some constructive feedback to give. And again, we ensure that we have channels put in place to ensure that they're heard and we can implement. So I don't think it's a question of how do you lead. Leaders know that we have to continue on knowing that this isn't a popularity contest. We don't take these jobs to be liked. We know that we have jobs to do, and it's not going to always be fair. Again, typically when you put out a survey, it is in the hopes that the survey itself is done in a scientific way because you want valid results. In this case, this particular survey was forwarded to many people. It was filled out several times by the same people. So again, it's difficult to speak to the results, but knowing that just if I'm addressing the overall topic itself, typically we as leaders know that people aren't going to always be happy, but this is an organization that does value employee satisfaction, does value employee well-being, are putting measures in place to ensure that there is internal accountability, putting measures in place to ensure that we have intervention systems in place so we can identify when there's risk early. And we want to be proactive and preemptive so that we're not always trying to be reactive after the fact when the damage is already done. And that's all I have to say on the survey. Thank you.
One of the things that you had mentioned in your written statement.
Claudia, that was 2 questions. So we're gonna move on, and then if we have time for additional questions, we'll come back to you. So thank you.
Okay.
We're gonna move over to Kristen Johansson of KYW.
Can you hear me? I apologize.
Yep.
Okay, it didn't do its unmute thing. So this is either for the mayor or for Erica. One of the mother or the grandmother, I should say, of one of the victims who mentioned, Kylie Williams, mentioned to me that instead of handing out new grants or giving out new grants to nonprofits across the city, why not put the money into school programs like arts, music, and sports? She said it was, she considered it reinventing the wheel when kids are already in school, they're already in a safe zone. Has there been consideration for this?
Erica, please.
Sure. I'll take this, Mayor. I think, one, to his grandmother, I extend my most insincere sympathies, and I understand her anger and frustration. I think that we have to approach this from every possible angle and every possible organization that touches our children. There is substantial investments made to our out-of-school programming through our Office of Children and Families. I think we have been coordinating with schools that are, we have been coordinating with school safety and schools that are at a high risk of children experiencing gun violence. We will continue to do that and continue to partnership and work in tandem with them. Additionally, for children who are disconnected from schools and young people who are older than school age. We have to focus on them as well and invest in resources for when children are not in school and not connected to schools. And so we are walking and chewing gum at the same time and doing both.
Muted, I apologize. So I'm sorry, you said, so you're doing both, you're considering putting some of that money into the schools as well? Okay, I didn't catch that last bit. That was
Sure. In conjunction with, there's a considerable amount of investment for out of school time and programs through our Office of Children and Families, in addition to focusing on young people who are either disconnected from school or older than school age, who are also vulnerable to gun violence. So we're doing both, yes.
Okay, my second question was for, I guess, any police official wants to answer this. I'm sure other reporters are also going to ask, but about the 16-year-old, do we have an update on what happened last night with the 16-year-old who was killed?
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. I can provide some information. I don't know if it's that much more than what was provided at the scene, but I can tell you that so far in the investigation, the information we've been able to develop is that there were 3 males that had been in the area and essentially lying in wait. And as I believe was reported at the scene, that tells us that the young victim was targeted. We do not know at this time at all why he would have been targeted. And that's what we're working on to develop. We are out there scouring the area for video of the individuals on foot, as well as any car they got in. And the good thing in this case is it appears that there are homes that have video out there, and we'll be pulling all that to identify the people who are responsible for this. We're also working all other normal investigative angles, but right now we don't have any solid direction on who's responsible, but we know that from the way the incident unfolded, that people were waiting to attack him. I can't hear, I'm sorry. I think you're still on mute, Kristen.
I was just saying, Mayor, I saw you on mute. Did you want to add to that?
No, that's all we know at this moment.
That's it.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Kristen. We'll move to Brian Mendoza of Telemundo.
Hi there. Is Armando going to be able to translate? Or
Hola, Brian. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes, Armando. Una pregunta que tengo primero es, se ha invertido mucho dinero en diferentes organizaciones que trabajan con la comunidad, especialmente con jóvenes, para tratar de hacerle frente a la violencia. Pero vemos que esto, o sea, no da tregua. Cada día escuchamos que otro joven es baleado o asesinado. ¿Se ha tratado tal vez de hacer algún tipo de investigación para determinar cuáles son los factores que están causando esta violencia, esta alza en violencia entre menores?
The question is directed to the mayor. We know that...
Or Daniel, or the commissioner.
Or commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner. Money has been invested in different community organizations targeting young people, especially in order to face this threat of violence in the city. But it seems to be ongoing. People are getting either shot or killed constantly. Have there been any research or any investigation as to the underlying factors to this violence in the city?
Well, the underlying factor is the easy availability of guns. And I will continue to say that, even though I'm blue in the face, is that when I was 16 years old, I never saw a gun, let alone had access to them. So take that as the base problem that we have. But in many of these situations, you take the gun out of the equation and it's a fist fight and not a murder scene. But we're working based on what our community partners are telling us and asking us for help so they can get the resources necessary to get their arms around our kids so they do not interact with each other in a violent way, that they can learn how to talk to each other and work out their problems in a reasonable, peaceful way, even if that resorts sometimes in somebody punching somebody. But the availability of guns and will continue to be a problem when you can get a gun in Pennsylvania faster than you get a driver's license. You have to get a driver's license with a written test, a driving test, and insurance. And you don't need any of those things for a gun. So we will continue to work with our community partners, with our clergy, with all the folks who are on the ground to try to get between our kids so they don't hurt each other. But it is frustrating, and we will continue doing our best and working with those folks on a daily basis.
La respuesta, Brian, es que, por supuesto, la razón subyacente es la falta de control y la libre disponibilidad de armas de fuego ilegales en la ciudad. Y voy a estar hasta el cansancio repitiendo eso, nos dice el alcalde. Cuando él tenía 16 años de edad, él ni siquiera había visto, o mucho menos había tenido acceso a las armas de fuego. Ese es el problema de base, obviamente. La disponibilidad de armas hace que lo que hubiera sido una pelea a puñetazo limpio se convierta en un área de asesinato y tiroteos. Nosotros vamos a seguir continuando nuestro trabajo con las organizaciones comunitarias para ayudar a la gente que está en la calle, proporcionándoles recursos para que la gente pueda interactuar, conversar y trabajar sus diferencias de una forma más civilizada, para que se haga esto de una forma pacífica. Obviamente esto puede llegar a peleas de puños entre la gente, pero siempre va a ser mejor que hacerlo de una forma violenta como está sucediendo tan prácticamente. Y esta es una crisis continuada. Nosotros trabajamos con nuestros socios comunitarios, con los clérigos y los religiosos y la gente en la calle para que la gente joven pueda ver de que hay una salida para todo esto. Y obviamente vamos a seguir trabajando porque es algo muy frustrante, pero tenemos que hacerlo. Gracias.
Armando, sé que Kristen hizo esta pregunta previo a que yo estuviera aquí, pero lo necesito en español. Si me pueden dar una actualización o más información acerca del incidente que ocurrió anoche con el joven de 16 años que fue baleado al llegar a su casa después del trabajo.
I know that this question has already been asked, but for the benefit of the Spanish-speaking audience, I would like to get more information on the question that Kristen asked before about an update or any information about the incident where the 16-year-old got shot when he was returning home last night.
Sure, and I'll take that. Thanks, Brian. Again, at this point, there's a lot that we don't know, but what we do know based on recovery of surveillance video from the area is that there were three males. We believe there were three males that were essentially lying in wait for the victim to return home. And upon his return to the home on Ferrisman Street, he was shot repeatedly, and therefore we believe he was specifically targeted. We do not know why he would have been targeted, and that is what the investigation will hopefully uncover, as well as identify those who are responsible for shooting him. And that's where we stand right now.
Brian, la respuesta nuevamente en este momento es que no tenemos toda la información. Lo que sí sabemos, y lo sabemos a través de videos de seguimiento que teníamos, era que tres varones estaban acechando a espera del regreso del joven que regresaba a su casa. Lo estaban esperando y le dispararon repetidas veces. Por lo tanto, nosotros pensamos que él era un objetivo previamente escogido, aunque no sabemos el por qué. Y nosotros vamos a seguir investigando para, obviamente, descubrir los motivos y descubrir a los perpetradores de este tiroteo.
Gracias, Armando. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. We'll move now to Matt Petrillo, CBS.
Hi, good afternoon. Could you tell me how is the officer doing who was shot yesterday? If the commissioner, if the mayor, if you had visited or talked to him at all today?
Well, we visited soon after he was shot to Penn Presbyterian. As always, when I go to a hospital relative to a police officer being shot, it's a frightening experience because you don't know what you're going to encounter. When I turned the corner into the examination room, he was sitting up in bed. He shook both my hands and the commissioner's hand and smiled. And he was going off for a CAT scan, and they'll see whether he needs further surgery or anything else in the future. But thank God he was okay. Obviously shot, but okay. I don't know what the current condition is.
Thank you. Commissioner, could you explain why did the taser do so little to stop that suspect?
You know, it's an ongoing investigation, and until we complete everything and take a look at why the taser deployment was ineffective, I wouldn't be able to tell you. But we do know, just, you know, with taser deployment or electronic control weapons, we should really call them. It really varies. It depends on the subject. It depends on outer clothing. It depends on whether or not the prongs actually connect in the areas where we're intended. There's so many factors. If someone's actually moving, it could impact, you know, how the prongs make contact. And then distance is also another key factor in that. So until we are able to peel back all the layers, we really won't know. We do know, again, that in some instances, you know, if you're with a really determined person, it wouldn't be effective at all either. So we just don't know what the answer to that is right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Matt. We'll now move to Saj Purple Blackwell.
Good afternoon, everyone. My first question is to Mr. Mayor, Mayor Kenney. You have discussed with us several times that you disagree with the requirement for future PPD inductees to have to live in the city in order to be a Philadelphia police officer.
No, I say that. I don't get the question right. That they have to live in the city for a year prior to hiring them. That's different than, I think they should have to live in the city, but they should have to live in the city a year before we hire them.
Exactly. You've stated that several times. My question is, have you yet addressed City Council on maybe changing that requirement?
I mean, look, it used to be the case years ago when I was in City Council, that rule was in effect. It took me a number of years to change it. Finally did change it, that you didn't have to live in the city for a year in advance, but you could be hired and move into the city within 6 months. And I believe all officers should live in the city of Philadelphia. I think all city employees should live in the city of Philadelphia. But we have a hard time in this environment where people really don't always want to be police officers in recruiting people when we can't go nationally to attract qualified, diverse officers and to have them move into the city to become new residents. I've talked to council individually. They passed that legislation, I think 17-0. And I asked people to lobby their council members if we're going to get to a situation where we have really difficulty refilling our ranks from people retiring, we're going to have to do something about that rule. I would urge people to, if they care about it, to call their council member and say they disagree with that position.
So you have addressed City Council as a whole or not yet?
I've told them how I feel about it. It was my legislation they reversed. So they're pretty clear that I was not supportive of what they did, but they did it, and we'll see how it works out. But we're going to have difficulty attracting people without going nationwide.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And then my second question can be for Commissioner Outlaw or any of the PPD. Of course, the word on the street right now is that we are dealing with a citywide gang violence because these murders have been specifically almost like professional hits, although lacking in aim. But these have been targeted individuals. They're targeted with precision, and it's an ongoing case throughout the city. We're being told that it's a lot of gang violence. Are we yet at the point where we are tapping in the anti-gang violence task force or anything else that will be more specific to these specifically and targeted murders with our young people?
Thank you for that question. Commissioner Dales?
Yes. How are you, Ms. Purple? How are you? So just to let you know, we have been working with our local, state, and federal partners. And yes, we are focusing on these groups. We also working with the MDO's GVI program as well. They had a call in last week, and they were definitely focusing on the right groups. There was a shooting last week, which pretty much some of those members were a part of the GVI program. So we are definitely focusing on the right folks, I will say. I can't go into too much information because we do have open investigations going on throughout the city. But I will say we are working with our local, state, and federal partners to crack down on these groups, these violent groups.
So you guys do feel like it is a gang violence specifically?
I won't say all the shootings are, but we would say we have is not as many as you believe, which are gang related. We have some where I mentioned the top three motives: drugs and arguments. But I would say there aren't a lot of gang related shootings throughout the city as you pretty much presented, but I won't ignore the fact that there are some. I'll leave it at that, all right?
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll now move to Mike D'Onofrio of Axios.
All right, here we go. I guess this is for the police commissioner or Mayor Kenney. Considering the current level of homicides now and seen throughout the year, are you planning any major changes to the city's anti-violence plan in the coming weeks or months, or are you just staying the course?
Commissioner, you have something to add?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
So I think we've been asked this question before, and we report these numbers out, and what we've been reporting is that although the numbers, we started off really, really high. So we got out of the gate and then we entered into the summer. We saw some pretty high spikes, increased spikes, but we're still seeing a steady decline. So, as I reported out last week and the week before that in a very public council hearing, we know that our strategies are working. We're slowly chipping away at what we're doing on the enforcement end. So I think, with any strategy, there's a tendency every now and again to want to have knee-jerk reactions and say, okay, this isn't working right now today in the short or midterm. So let's completely throw everything out and start all over again. That's not what we're doing here. And I don't think we should do that with any strategy. We have to continuously assess and then tweak in areas where we know some things may not be as effective. But to continuously throw the baby out with the bathwater and start all over again, I don't think makes the most sense for us. What we know we're doing has been working. We know that, working with our other law enforcement entities on our end has been effective. We know that focused deterrence, or however you want to call it, we know that works. We know evidence-based policing and intelligence-based policing works. So we have to make sure that we continue on with what we know works, ensure that there are proper resources assigned to do this work that we all know works, and continue to stay the course.
All right. And I guess just the second question is are you or in the department planning on deploying any additional resources for the Halloween weekend?
Commissioner Dales.
Trying to get my camera up on. Here we go. All right, there we go. How are you? So we did put the word out to make sure that the officers are vigilant and make sure that they're mindful of the fact that during Halloween, evening of Halloween, to pay close attention to our pinpoint zones and also our problematic areas where gun violence is high. So we want to make sure that we are paying close attention to that. But as far as hiring folks, no, we haven't done that, but we are paying close attention to our problematic zones during the trick-or-treat time.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Mike. We'll now move to Anna Orso of the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Hi, everyone. Regarding the situation last night in Overbrook, is there an ID yet on the decedent in that incident? And any more of like a narrative in terms of what prompted the call to police? We understand it was some sort of landlord-tenant dispute, possibly. Any more there?
Anna, I can only, because it's an officer-involved shooting, I'm not going to get into details, but I can tell you that the officers were called there, as you indicated, as a result of a dispute. It did involve individual property owner. And as far as the release of the name, that will go through our public affairs. Any delay on that would be as a result of a delay for family notification. I don't have exactly where we stand on that, but I'll follow up and make sure that information is being released. If it hasn't been released, that it gets released as soon as it can. But first, we have to ensure that family's been notified.
Great, thank you. One more question regarding Shafiq Lewis and the Judson Street homicide. Is anything known about the motive in that shooting, or anything else known about Mr. Lewis's background and what might have prompted this?
At this point, there's a lot less known about the motive and what you touched on than who did it. And again, I will commend the investigators and also the community for having cameras in the area. I've spoken and I repeatedly talk about the importance of video surveillance cameras in helping us on clearing our investigations, our shooting, especially our homicide investigations. I don't know, I don't believe it's known that he was shooting at an individual in that car or not. I don't have any reason to believe that the person, the 13-year-old that he shot and killed, would have been the intended target, but he was shooting at the car that was filled with 6 young people at the time. So the deduction is that he for some reason wanted to shoot at someone that was in that car, and he took the young man's life. But again, the importance of the surveillance is critical, and I always try to emphasize how that really gets us to where we have to get to identify the offender. So that's where we are now.
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Well, it's 1 minute after 2, but we have time for one more question or one more set of questions from Peter Crimmins at WHYY.
Hi there, thank you. I have a question for Commissioner Outlaw about the low morale thing. I wonder if you could try to describe what factors you think lead to it. This is in the interest of specificity and perhaps at the risk of being obvious. You mentioned that there are a lot of happening to officers in a compressed amount of time. If you could describe what factors you think are causing low morale.
Sure. If I want to start really, really large, right? Really, really big picture, just nationally, there was a narrative, and it's funny how it came and now it's kind of, I don't want to say it's came and gone, but if we remember, there was a movement to defund us. And then also a lot of narrative around abolishing police. And it was a time period in which law enforcement in general, it made it very clear that we no longer get the benefit of the doubt. So in everything that we do, we're expected to be, a good friend told me, you're expected to do and be everything and nothing at the same time. Who can pull that off, right? How do we figure out what our roles are when the narratives are vacillating between we want more cops, no, we don't, defund, oh, and by the way, we want you to do these additional things, but we don't believe that it's okay to give you more resources to do it. It was just a lot of counterintuitive or conflicting narratives all at once with us caught in the middle of that. That's just in general. When I'm talking about a lot of things that we've personally been through as a department, when you talk about civil unrest, we've had our own critical incident last year. That brought additional civil unrest. Obviously, we had elections here where there was additional unrest tied to the elections in Philadelphia. Specifically, there was the pandemic, the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that occurred shortly after my arrival here. We had Corporal O'Connor that was murdered within 30 days of me coming here, and then several officers that lost their lives due to COVID. After that, it's just been one thing after the other. And then on top of that, you have new leadership that comes in that's saying, okay, we're going to do some things differently. And I shared that there's 2 things that cops don't like. We don't like the way things are, and we don't like change. There's no surprises about that. So in addition to all of that, we're trying to adapt as an organization to the changing expectations of community as we're seeing a lot of the social determinants evolve and change too. The increases in homelessness and kids being out of school and not having warm touch points, all of the things that we had to kind of figure out how to adapt to. Uncertainty doesn't bode well for a lot of people, including organizations. So given that we're very, very upfront, very public, we're very visible, it has an impact because ultimately we're all human beings. We all have emotions. We've seen a very high level of trauma. The shootings, again, it impacts us as well. It's our officers that are scooping these victims in the backs of their cars, rushing them to hospitals. It's dispatchers answering these calls, not always knowing what the dispositions will be. So that's what I mean. It's typically you'd see a once in a lifetime critical incident that shakes the entire nation and how we do things. But we saw a lot of these things happen at once. So yes, it does impact morale. In addition to the fact that there's just so much uncertainty out there around not knowing how we prioritize, the crimes that we're seeing out there. That's another overlay, an added overlay. So I appreciate the question. Hopefully that was specific enough. But yes, it is what it is, and we're all working towards improving that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And given the timing, we are going to have to conclude today's briefing. We apologize to those reporters that we didn't get to, but you can always email us directly to follow up after we conclude today. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks on Wednesday, November 10th. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Take care.
Recording